Marc Jacobs used to be everywhere. He transformed Louis Vuitton, launched one of the most successful diffusion lines of the 2000s, and built a personal brand that stretched from haute couture to department store perfume counters. His shows were loud, unpredictable, emotional, and, for a while, fashion didn't just admire Marc, it followed him. But somewhere along the way, the empire faded. Marc by Marc Jacobs was shut down. Dozens of stores closed. Revenue was cut in half. Yet because there was no scandal, no headline collapse, the story slipped past most people. The name stayed visible. So did Marc. But the brand's fall, the real one, went almost unnoticed. And that's exactly what's strange. How does a billion-dollar fashion empire lose half its value without anyone really noticing? Now the name is back, but not the way it used to be. So what really happened to the brand that once defined an era? And if the fall went unnoticed, what happens when the comeback does too? To understand that, we have to go back. Not to the fall, but to the rise. Because the Marc Jacobs brand didn't just appear out of nowhere. It came from a designer who knew exactly how to break the rules and still get everyone to follow. Marc Jacobs didn't rise quietly. He got fired for it. Long before the billion-dollar empire and the Louis Vuitton collaborations, Marc Jacobs was a fashion outsider who learned early on that controversy could build a career faster than compromise. He studied at Parsons School of Design in New York, where he won multiple awards and first began to attract industry attention. While still a student, he worked at Charivari, the legendary New York boutique known for introducing avant-garde European designers to America, giving Jacobs an early exposure to groundbreaking fashion and creative risk-taking. In 1992, as the head designer for the classic American label Perry Ellis, he shocked the industry by sending a grunge-inspired collection down the runway. Think flannel shirts layered over silk slips, crochet beanies, loose-fitting sweaters, and chunky Doc Martens. It was messy, unexpected, and completely unlike the polished elegance Perry Ellis had been known for. Editors reacted with confusion and disdain. Critics called it sloppy, even lazy. Perry Ellis executives were furious. The president of the company famously called it ridiculous. And within weeks, Jacobs was fired from his position. But something unusual happened. The collection that got him fired suddenly exploded in popularity. Celebrities adopted the look. Vogue, which had originally dismissed the collection, began featuring grunge-inspired editorials. Suddenly, Jacobs's perceived mistake had become a style-defining moment, proving that controversy could sometimes be more valuable than critical praise. By the late 90s, Jacobs had leveraged his newfound fame to build a loyal following for his namesake label. His shows became cultural events, attracting New York's downtown art scene alongside Hollywood's A-list. Instead of appearing in designer suits, Jacobs himself would close shows casually, jeans, sneakers, and sometimes even tears, an emotional gesture that made him relatable and intriguing. His style was personal, often nostalgic, and distinctly emotional. He mixed references that weren't traditionally glamorous, suburban Americana, thrift store finds, teenage rebellion, and transformed them into pieces that felt covetable and fresh. It was fashion rooted in feeling rather than rules, a rarity in the industry at the time. Then came Louis Vuitton, the move that defined his career and transformed luxury fashion altogether. In 1997, Jacobs was appointed as Vuitton's creative director, becoming the first designer ever to hold that title for the French luxury luggage house. What followed wasn't merely a reinvention, it was a full-scale cultural takeover. He brought pop artists like Steven Sprouse, Takashi Murakami, and Richard Prince into collaborations, turning classic Vuitton bags into pieces of contemporary art. The collections mixed streetwear with luxury, challenging the boundaries of what high fashion could be. Vuitton's sales soared under Jacobs, reportedly multiplying tenfold. Fashion insiders joked the bags had become secondary. It was the hype and cultural buzz that drove people into stores. While revolutionizing Vuitton, Jacobs simultaneously expanded his own brand. In 2001, he introduced Marc by Marc Jacobs, a diffusion line that democratized his aesthetic, making it affordable and accessible to millions. It wasn't just clothing, it was attitude. Canvas totes, graphic tees, quirky accessories. Each item felt playful, smart, and uniquely New York. You didn't need to understand fashion deeply to connect with Marc by Marc Jacobs. You just needed to want something fresh, stylish, and easy. By the early 2010s, Jacobs had built an empire with over 250 stores worldwide, a massive fragrance and beauty business, and runway shows that routinely became events talked about beyond fashion circles. Celebrities, artists, teenagers, everyone wanted a piece of Marc Jacobs. At its peak, the company was generating close to $1 billion a year. Jacobs himself had transcended the role of designer, becoming a pop culture figure synonymous with contemporary style. But just beneath that glossy surface, things were quietly starting to shift. That shift didn't happen overnight. Marc Jacobs' empire didn't crash with headlines or drama. Instead, it faded quietly, store by store, season by season, until the energy that had once defined it simply wasn't there anymore. The first major blow came in 2015, when Marc by Marc Jacobs, the accessible diffusion line that had once made the brand feel youthful and relatable, was abruptly shut down. Officially, it was marketed as an effort to simplify things, to unify the vision. But the reality wasn't so neat. Customers who had connected to the brand through that playful, affordable line suddenly felt left behind. Entry-level prices vanished, and the path to becoming a Marc Jacobs fan felt harder, colder, and more expensive. Soon after, stores started closing. Quietly, gradually, major flagships vanished from city centers, leaving behind empty storefronts and unanswered questions. Revenue fell sharply, tumbling from a peak of nearly $1 billion per year to under $300 million within a few years. Marc Jacobs kept showing collections, but the enthusiasm surrounding them steadily dimmed. Some seasons felt like forced nostalgia, others like disconnected experiments. Critics grew uncertain, the industry lost interest. While Marc himself remained a visible figure, appearing at events, maintaining his celebrity, the brand he had built slipped deeper into confusion. Then in 2019, a clear sign emerged that the empire was no longer what it once was. LVMH sold Marc Jacobs' lucrative beauty license to Estee Lauder. On paper, it looked like good business. Beauty still sold well, and Jacobs' name had power. But symbolically, it signaled the end of a dream. Marc Jacobs would never become the Michael Kors-level American powerhouse LVMH once imagined. Still, there was no dramatic collapse. No scandal, no viral headlines. The brand just lost momentum, slowly, steadily, until most people had already stopped paying attention. But in fashion, nothing really stays gone forever, especially when nostalgia enters the picture. By 2020, Marc Jacobs had quietly started to regain attention, but not through its runways or boutiques. Instead, it resurfaced in thrift stores, resale apps, and social media feeds, where younger customers rediscovered the quirky, nostalgic pieces from the brand's earlier peak. The oversized tote bag, once an everyday staple, was suddenly everywhere again. Except, this time, it wasn't just functional. It was viral. This wasn't a traditional comeback. There was no grand relaunch or big-budget marketing campaign. Instead, the return felt accidental, organic, driven by a younger audience discovering something they considered vintage. The logo, once a bit tired, now felt authentic and cool again. Not because the company said so, but because TikTok did. Seeing this unexpected interest, the brand introduced Heaven in 2020, a smaller, subversive line aimed directly at Gen Z. It wasn't about luxury. It wasn't even strictly about fashion. It was about tapping into nostalgia, youth culture, and the power of irony. Collaborations with emerging designers, indie artists, and niche celebrities gave Marc Jacobs new relevance, quietly bringing it back into conversations it had long been absent from. But there was a catch. For all its buzz, Heaven wasn't designed to rebuild the entire Marc Jacobs empire. It was just one small piece. The main line continued to struggle to find its footing. Flagship stores stayed closed, luxury buyers remained skeptical, and revenues from core collections stayed flat. Marc Jacobs, the brand, was back in pop culture, but Marc Jacobs, the billion-dollar empire, was still missing in action. This new popularity had a strange side effect. While Heaven and thrifted tote bags brought Marc Jacobs back into conversations, the brand itself started feeling even more divided. Two worlds now existed under one logo. On one side was a fresh, youthful audience, embracing the sublabel. On the other, luxury shoppers who remembered what Marc Jacobs once was, but weren't seeing anything new that resonated with them. And in between was confusion. Marc Jacobs, historically known for bold runway statements, now lacked a clear identity in the luxury space. Was it high fashion, streetwear, nostalgia, or something else entirely? The main collections became increasingly inconsistent, some seasons ambitious, others muted. In 2022, a couture-like show featured towering platform boots and exaggerated silhouettes, while the next season returned with understated basics and almost no press coverage, leaving buyers and critics unsure of what direction the brand was even aiming for. Buyers were unsure, stores hesitated, and the buzz that Heaven created rarely extended upward. Even the company's own vision seemed uncertain. Leadership shifted multiple times in just a few short years. Creative teams changed, strategies blurred. The brand seemed caught between wanting to revive past glories and chasing new trends without fully committing to either. Then the most telling shift came quietly, again. High-end department stores started removing Marc Jacobs bags and clothing from their shelves. Once positioned alongside brands like Prada and Gucci, Marc Jacobs was increasingly displayed next to labels like Coach or Kate Spade. It wasn't just symbolic, it was an admission. Marc Jacobs was no longer viewed as true luxury. This identity crisis didn't happen overnight. It crept in slowly, almost invisibly, but eventually became impossible to ignore. The question wasn't whether Marc Jacobs could stay relevant. That had already happened. But whether it could ever again become the empire it once was. Today, Marc Jacobs is a brand at a crossroads, alive, visible, but still struggling to define what it truly wants to become. The success of Heaven and a wave of viral nostalgia have offered the brand something many labels don't get: a second chance. Younger consumers who'd never set foot in a Marc Jacobs boutique are now discovering it through vintage resale, TikTok, and Gen Z trends. But nostalgia alone isn't enough to rebuild a billion-dollar empire, especially one that once competed at fashion's highest levels. In July 2025, Marc Jacobs returned to the runway at the New York Public Library with a collection that openly embraced Victorian romanticism, exaggerated silhouettes, and doll-like details. It was intentionally theatrical, dramatic, and reminiscent of Jacobs' earlier boundary-pushing style. The message seemed clear. After years of uncertainty and fragmented identity, Marc Jacobs was making a statement again, attempting to reclaim the artistic authority it had lost. But even that statement came with questions. The show lasted barely 5 minutes, leaving critics intrigued yet uncertain whether the collection marked a serious revival or simply a stylish reminder of past greatness. Was it a genuine creative comeback or another nostalgic play, dressed up for a new audience? Behind the scenes, these questions have real stakes. The brand needs more than runway buzz to reestablish itself. High-end buyers, wary after years of inconsistency, still aren't fully convinced. Department stores remain cautious. And despite the new attention, the company's business fundamentals haven't fully recovered from the quiet unraveling of the past decade. Marc Jacobs himself remains involved creatively, yet the question now extends beyond him. It's about identity, vision, and sustainability. Can the main collections find their footing again? Can the brand restore its luxury positioning? Or is it now permanently relegated to contemporary status alongside Coach or Kate Spade? The 2025 collection showed ambition, but ambition isn't certainty. Marc Jacobs is proof that even powerful brands can quietly slip from prominence, and that second chances in fashion don't always come easy. Yet fashion also loves nothing more than a genuine comeback. The next move is critical. Can Marc Jacobs leverage its newfound momentum, fueled by nostalgia and recent runway buzz, into a true rebirth? Or will it become just another label remembered fondly, admired nostalgically, but ultimately left behind? The answer isn't clear yet, but one thing is certain. After years of quietly slipping, Marc Jacobs now has everyone's attention again. What the brand chooses to do with that attention will define not only its next chapter, but also its legacy. What are your thoughts on the journey of Marc Jacobs? Let us know in the comments. Till next time.